What's up, y'all? It's Shuffle, and today we're going to make an Occultist guide. So we're going to talk about Occultist and how to use them and all his cool, fun features that he has in Darkest Dungeon 1, not Darkest Dungeon 2. As always, before we get started, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, leave your thoughts down below in the comments, make sure to check out the box for all the cool links like Discord, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thank you to everyone that decides to do that. It means a lot and it keeps us going. As is customary in the guide series, we are going to cover the strengths and weaknesses of the character. We're going to talk about how to play the character, and then we're going to go over the skills and trinkets and some good quirks, and then a couple of example teams to get you started. Strengths. What is Occultist good at? Occultist is a very flexible support. He can fit into most teams. You're going to see why and how later on in the video. He has really good crit rates, surprisingly, for someone who is a support unit. The benefit of having decent crit rates means that not only do you get the secondary effects more frequently from your moves, you get the bonus 20% for critting someone, but also critting gives you stress heals. So even things like Vuln Hex and Weakening Curse can crit fairly consistently, which leads to you healing 3 stress here and there, which is pretty nice. Occultist has some really cool trinkets as well. He also comes with 2 stun trinkets that are class trinkets, which means that between that and Hands from the Abyss, he can reach the highest level of stun possible in the game, which is 220% stun chance if you crit. Otherwise, it's base 200%, which is still nuts, and that lets Occultists double or sometimes even triple stun enemies and lock them down. Then if you care about doing dark runs or torchless or whatever you want to call it, then Occultist is kind of a double-edged sword. He's a bit fragile for that type of game mode, but he's also fast enough with the stuns, and some of his other moves have anti-torch synergy, so he doesn't really lose too much, or he doesn't hamper your team as much in torchless, so he is pretty good in that regard. For weaknesses, Occultist has low HP for a frontline unit. I joke about him being a frontline unit. You can put him anywhere, but honestly, he does pretty well in the front. But he does have kind of low HP, so he goes down pretty quick if he gets hit twice. He has low base accuracy for his more highly offensive moves like stun and stab. So those 2 moves specifically have pretty abysmal accuracy for what they're supposed to be for and who you're targeting most likely. So that means that Occultist usually does like to have some form of accuracy, either through Jester or Trinkets. I regard Occultist as a high skill cap character. He has some pretty easy ways that he can get through the game, and you don't really have to know too much about him. But if you want to get the most out of this character, you really do have to understand what he's capable of and what type of team you're trying to make. You can throw him on most teams with Hands from the Abyss and like Sacrificial Stab and the heal, and he'll get the job done. But honestly, like I was saying, if you need him to be maximized, you do have to understand his kit, because sometimes you're going to swap moves, or sometimes you have to pick some kind of weird assortment of moves that you might not have expected for the team to make it work. If you're playing in not torchless settings, that means that Occultist does like to have a couple extra torches on hand, especially if you're going to spam Hands from the Abyss, because that will drain your torches very quickly. Or you can bring someone else on the team like Crusader or Vestal that have skills to raise torchlight during battle to offset this detriment. So how do you actually play this character effectively? There are 3 specific instances where Occultist does feel pretty good, or at least to build around. The first one is a frontline stun unit, so put him in rank 1 or rank 2 with Hands from the Abyss, Sacrificial Stab, and his heal, as I was saying. Then your choice of 4th move, depending on what your party needs, and he can do just fine. This type of Occultist can go into pretty much any team for free without really thinking, so just be aware of that. Don't try and do anything super mega fancy if you don't want to. Don't stress out if you can't make him feel like he's the star of the team. He's doing enough, and he's just fine with that. The next archetype for Occultist is rank 3. So obviously just putting him a spot back does change him quite a bit. You lose Hands from the Abyss, which changes the playstyle, so instead of Hands from the Abyss, you have to decide what else you're going to put on. And his moveset really does open up if you decide not to run the stun. So you can run Sacrificial Stab and the heal. Those are usually pretty good to have on most of the time. But then you can trade out the other moves. You can use Daemon's Pull, you can use Curse, Hex, Artillery, like whatever you're trying to do. If you want a damage focused Occultist, you just put on Artillery and maybe Pull and Stab with the heal. Or if you want to go like super support, you can have, again, Stab and heal, but then have like the Curse and the Hex together. And that's, you know, that covers a lot of bases. So it's really just whatever you're looking for and what the team needs. The final archetype, which doesn't really feel as strong compared to the other 2, but it's still pretty good, is the rank 4, just like pure support type of Occultist. Sure, you can run Abyssal Artillery, which is fine, that does get the job done, but also from there, since you can use Sacrificial Stab or Hands from the Abyss, you have to pick some combination of the rest of your moves being the Daemon's Pull, the Curse, or the Hex alongside the heal. You could dump the heal, honestly, if you want to run like Vestal, but that's more of a rank 3 Occultist setup anyway, so I don't recommend that. But otherwise, you still have some pretty flexible options, but your team has to be able to make use of them as well. Next up are 3 more tips in the how to play section, but the first is when you're using Occultist, the big trap that most people fall into is they don't heal soon enough. I have talked about this so many times in my videos, but I need to keep talking about it as time goes on. But Occultist is a character that, because of the nature of his heal being inconsistent and the fact it can roll 0, for Occultist to be a decent healer, you have to heal early. If they are at about 60-50% HP and you feel like hitting them for like 7 in terms of healing would be beneficial, then you should be using it right then. You should not be waiting till Death's Door, because at some point he will hit 0, he might even bleed you, and then he'll kill you, and then you're going to be on Reddit getting mad. So don't do that, don't be that person, heal sooner. The other part of this is the fact that with Occultist, you do like to run co-healers with him, so he doesn't completely get shafted by the roll of 0. So you don't have to run Vestal, that's a bit overkill, but you can run Flagellant, who's actually a better healer than Occultist. You can run Arbalest, you can run Plague Doctor or Antiquarian. All these characters are pretty effective healers alongside Occultist. So you don't have to run him as a solo healer. So if you want to do that though, if you want to have Occultist as a healer in the team, it's usually better to have a co-healer alongside him. Occultist likes to have speed, so he likes to go early in the round, so if you can get a couple speed quirks or trinkets on him, that's usually pretty good. The reason he likes to go early in the turn is that Occultist, being such a offensively oriented support character, meaning that he has things like Curse to reduce protection, and he has the Mark to, lower dodge so units can get hit easier, but also get Mark's energy, means that he usually needs to go before other people. It even helps to go early to use the stun, so make sure that Occultist does have some form of speed if you're going to use them on your team. The last tip is a thick tip. I should have some kind of like graphic, to denote that Thick gave us a tip for the video. Actually, Thick gives us a lot of tips, but this one specifically is one he wanted to make sure got into the video. But if you are hurting for accuracy trinkets early in the game, then use Vulnerability Hex. It's much better than Weakening Curse early on, so level 0 to maybe like 3 or so, or even 4 depending, but usually 0 to 2, I would say too. But I digress. If you want to use Hex to stick to someone to lower their dodge in order to hit them easier, then that is a very good thing to use it for. You don't even need the Mark synergy, you can just have the dodge debuff. It's easier to justify this too at lower levels because I believe Weakening Curse starts off at like minus 10% damage and protection, which is honestly not much. That's like plus or minus 1 damage from the enemy or against the enemy for the most part, and that's just really not a huge deal at level 0 and 1 and 2 and stuff. So later on, when Curse scales a bit higher, then it's better, but before then, Vulnerability Hex is probably just much better and more usable. For combat skills, Occultist has a mix of decent damage moves for Eldritch enemies, as well as utility and a heal. So Sacrificial Stab, there's nothing really special about this. The accuracy is kind of bad, but then you have a nice crit modifier and bonus damage against Eldritch, which are pretty common enemies, especially near the end of the game. Artillery in this game is not nearly as good as it is in the second game, so that kind of sucks. But besides that, it is an okay move for damage if you have some kind of good reach on your team trying to do backline damage. But otherwise, the accuracy is kind of low at 105. The backline enemy is usually the most evasive, and the crit modifier is not that good for a damage attack, even though it is a cleave, and those usually don't have good crit modifiers. Anyway, Weakening Curse is a move that gets much better the farther into the game you get and the more levels it gets, so once it gets up to 5, it is very powerful. When it's at rank 1, it's just 10% for both damage and protection, so it's not that strong. But the move does have a very good accuracy modifier at 115. It is not going to do 0 damage because it has, some kind of positive damage modifier at 25%, so it can't roll 0 unless the enemy has prot. But what really stands out for this move is the big crit modifier. I've seen this thing hit for as hard as like 5 damage at champion, and that is actually no small amount of damage. That's good enough to close out some kills on low health enemies. And then you have the crit modifier, which helps get you bonus debuff chance by increasing it by 20%, as well as giving you stress heal on yourself or someone else on the team. So the crit modifier is really good, and when you stack this with something like Intimidate for Leper, which also lowers enemy damage, these two moves can put someone's damage to effectively 0, and that can be very good in specific fights. Plus, everyone enjoys the minus protection debuff this provides, and being able to take someone's damage down, like Giant in the Wield or any of the size 2 enemies that hit very hard, having a way to lower their damage, even if you're not trying to get through the protection or whatever, is still very valuable. It's kind of like preemptive healing. Reconstruction is not a good heal move. It does the job. This is a big point in the video, and I'm going to reiterate it here, is if you need to heal with Occultist, you need to do it when someone's at about half HP or like 70% or something like that. If they're at 30, you should be doing it anyway. And if they're at death's door, you gotta hope this doesn't roll 0 or bleed the person. That can happen, which is why you have to heal sooner. This move gets better the later into the game you get, because the more or the higher the top end of it gets, once it gets up to 22 instead of 13 or whatever it starts at, it's a much bigger range, so less chance to roll 0. This should be on every Occultist build for the most part, just because having an emergency heal is better than not having one. Vulnerability Hex has the 115 accuracy, which is really nice. It can do damage, you know, it's got 10% damage remaining after that damage penalty, and then it has a 9% crit modifier, much like Weakening Curse, which is really good for the reasons we talked about, being able to snipe kills and get random stress healing. It's pretty solid as a mark, but I like the marks that lower protection better, so Bounty Hunter and Houndmaster specifically. But this still gets the job done, and as Thick said before, having the minus 20 dodge is really helpful for bridging the accuracy gap when you're starting the game. This doesn't need to be on every build, but it's good to have early, and it gets okay later on when you have specific teams built around it. Hands from the Abyss, this is why you put Occultist in the front line. So 110 accuracy is good enough. It's only got a half damage penalty, which is pretty nice, and then it's got a huge, massive crit modifier at 13%. This thing crits all the frickin' time, especially with like Battle Ballad or anything that gives you other crit like Trinkets and Quirks. Having a 150 stun chance at level 5, and I believe 100 at base, means that it is one of the highest stun potential moves in the game. And then you factor in Occultist Trinkets that give more stun chance, and then the stun coming out from this thing is absolutely nuts. This is why you put Occultist in the front line. It's specifically for this move. And since it lowers torch, if you're going to run this move with Occultist, you should be bringing a couple extra torches for the entire dungeon, because you're going to burn through them kind of quickly. Daemon's Pull is actually a pretty good move, especially for like the corpse destruction to help you get people up front. But the reason it's not universally ran on Occultist, unlike something like Reconstruction or Hands from the Abyss if you're up front, or Sacrificial Stab just because it's, you know, decent for reach and stuff, is because moving enemies isn't like a great strategy. Like, it works some places, it's good in some instances. There's some fights it can break by being able to move things, which is very good, but it's not like stun, where stun literally wins against any enemy that can't resist it. Moving enemies does not win against every enemies that don't resist it, so that's why it's not usually ran on everything, but it's still a pretty good move, and there are some strategies you can build around it. And then, like I said, being able to destroy corpses or something is pretty good in and of itself. Occultist has some pretty interesting camp skills. They're either discounted for the effects because they provide stress, or they do some stuff that's pretty hard to find. Abandon Hope is, you know, 1 point for healing them for 25 stress, which is pretty nice, but it can stress out the rest of your team. I believe both 50% chances can go off at the same time, so that means that you can heal Occultist for 25 and then stress damage someone else for 15. So make sure that if you're going to use any of Occultist skills that modify stress, that you move trinkets around appropriately. So any stress healing, give him a stress healing trinket if one can be equipped to him, or if your other party members have stress gain from trinkets, make sure to take those off before pressing these skills. Otherwise, for 1 point, Abandon Hope is good enough, and you can usually fit it in, but I usually don't press this. Dark Ritual is one of 2 camp skills that can remove mortality debuffs, which is very good. Crusader's the person that has the other one, and his, I believe, is also 3 points. So having 3 points to cure mortality debuff is a very powerful effect. Do not sleep on this. It is worth having in pretty much every instance, just because sometimes accidents happen. So being able to take off that stupid debuff once you go into boss battles is really nice to have. And then it also heals the target on top of it for half their life, which is really good. The stress and stuff and the reduced torchlight does suck, so make sure you plan around that. I would say Dark Strength is Occultist's best, you know, air quotes, camping ability, just because it costs 2 points. And 15 stress really isn't that big of a deal. You can kind of work that off, especially with his high crit rates or like a stress healer in the party. So it's really easy to offset this. And then 20% damage on a hero for 4 battles is pretty freaking nuts. This is how you turn characters into hyper carry status, where they just, you know, do all the damage on the team very easily. So you can drop this on Hellion, Abomination, Leper, those are really good targets. Well, when I say Abomination, I mean like transforming Abomination if you do run that. Or just anyone like even Highwayman, right? There are a lot of targets for this, and it does really good damage in terms of boosting their damage, I should say. So this is a very effective move for pretty much every situation, and I would probably try and find a way to run or put this on someone at every possible opportunity. Unspeakable Commune at 3 points is a discounted ambush prevention skill, which is nice, but also stresses out your entire team for 7 stress, so make sure you plan around that. But otherwise, this is pretty easy to weave in because all the other ambush preventers cost 4. So if you're going to do some other stress healing in the team anyway, then this is easy to use, so don't worry about that. The 7 stress is pretty much negligible. For Trinkets, Occultist has some pretty interesting options. They all augment his playstyle in different ways, but I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. So with Evasion Incense, this is pretty good at the start of the game because most enemies have about 72 accuracy at Apprentice. So this gets you into like 64% chance to be hit before any other modifiers, which is pretty nice. And -1 speed does suck a little bit, but it's a decent trade-off. Eldritch Killing Incense, this is really good if you want to just go straight damage Occultist. I would even argue this is better than the Sacrificial Cauldron, because if you're taking Occultist to kill enemies, it's going to be to kill Eldritch enemies. And we'll talk about the Sacrificial Cauldron in a minute, but this is definitely pretty good, especially if you go to somewhere like the Cove, where Eldritch is the normal tribal type. Cursed Incense actually isn't a bad trinket in terms of what it can do. It's just the fact that it's not really the best Occultist playstyle. So you have the debuff chance, which is pretty nice. Then you get move chance on top of it, and we talked about pull not being stellar compared to his other moves. And then you have -10% accuracy on top of that on someone that is very, very squishy. So it's nice to have the debuff stick, but debuff resist is usually one of the lower ones that enemies have. So having this massive chance doesn't matter too much. And then also the fact that Occultist can crit very consistently with his debuff moves means that you don't really need the extra push from the trinket itself, and then you lose HP on top of that. So it's not a bad trinket. There are definitely times to run it. It can still do you very well or do you some good, but this is one I find myself almost never using. Sacrificial Cauldron is okay in terms of just what it does. 20% damage for 10 stress, that's a pretty fair trade-off, but there are better damage options out there, and they're not class restricted. I would not go out of my way for this trinket, and I probably wouldn't build around it. Like I said, Eldritch Killing Incense much better, but this is still okay. Demon's Cauldron, this is one of those trinkets that's much like Blasphemous Vial, where if you see this on an early boss, you should go for it just because it's so powerful. You get the massive stun chance, this lets Occultist double or triple stun enemies. Then you get massive debuff chance, this kind of eclipses Cursed Incense as well. Then you get more crit, which sure, Occultist wants to crit, it's not bad. Minus virtue chance does suck, and then you get plus stress. So you have to be very careful, because if you have this on, you're probably not virtuing. It's a very low chance at that point. It's only 15% before other modifiers. So if you want to use Frontline Occultist, this is what's going on him every single time. It is very good. It's probably the best trinket he has. Actually, it's the second best, because I would say that Vial of Sand is probably the best. Vial of Sand is nuts. It is all of these fantastic upsides. This is DLC, by the way. This is Crimson Court DLC if you don't have it. But you get stun chance, 20 instead of 30 is pretty good. You get debuff chance, 20 is enough. Move chance, same as Cursed Incense. And then you get stun resist. That's actually really nice, because stun isn't too frequent from the enemies, but being able to resist stun is a nice thing to have. And then it has no downsides. Like, there's no reason not to run this. Like, even if you're not running Occultist up front, you can still run it for the other stuff and the stun resist, by the way. So really good. And then the set bonus to 15 dodge is pretty nice. Blood Pact, you don't have to be torchless to make this work. So if you want to go under 60 light, so basically just run it half the whole time, then this is, it's fine. You get 25% bonus damage for speed, minus bleed skill chance. That means that weird reconstruction's chance to bleed your allies is lower, which is very good. And then you trade 10% HP for hopefully 15 dodge because you're running the sets, and that's a pretty fair trade. So this is a solid trinket overall. It's just a bit weird in application. Like, you don't usually run it half torch. Usually you're either full torch or torchless. Those are just really the two modes that most people run in, and you don't find yourself consistently trying to stay at 50. Like, you can do it, sure, but it's not usually a common situation. Petrified Skull, very, very interesting as a trinket. This actually helps for frontline Occultist a lot. So if you want to run him with this and like Demon's Cauldron or something, when you go to the Cove or some other area that has a heavy amount of Eldritch enemies, that is really nice. It's also obviously good for Farmstead because Husk is the archetype of enemies there. Having a healing penalty doesn't matter too much when you have bonus health on top of it because you won't need as much healing, especially with the prod. So this really stretches out Occultist's effective HP, and really it doesn't have a noticeable downside. Like, yeah, you have the minus healing, but you're taking so much less damage because of the prod and the bonus HP and all that, that it really kind of cancels out and probably actually goes better defensively. So a really good trinket, just very tough to find the spot for it. Got some secondary trinket recommendations too before we go any further in the video. So these are just some neutral trinkets that are also pretty good on Occultist. There's Move Amulet if you really want to do some move chance stuff. It's there. It's not bad, just not really common when to use it, but it is a very nice alternative to Cursed Incense. I like this probably more. Steady Bracer, this fixes Occultist's early game accuracy issues, so if you want to run this, it's actually very good. I like this quite a lot if I have no other thing like Ancestor's Signet Ring and stuff, so really good. Don't sleep on this, very good green trinket to have. And then finally we have Ancestor Scroll. This is a neutral healing trinket that's pretty good for him to run. You could run Chirurgeons, which is the green equivalent of like, you know, just 15 raw healing, which is good. But Ancestor Scroll is just nicer to have, and the stress healing works on other things that, you know, give stress healing. So camp skills and I believe crits this applies to, I think. Someone check me on that, but I believe it applies to that too, so crit stress healing. And then finally, if you disarm traps, this also works on that. So really good. And since it's neutral, you can pass this around in the party as needed. So if you're camping and you have a stress healer like Houndmaster or Jester with camp stress skills, you can have them put this on and then they can heal everyone else for more stress healing. And then of note are any speed or dodge trinkets, so stuff like Feather Crystal, obviously very powerful as well. For quirks, a lot of quirks work with Occultist pretty well, so usually I try and prioritize anything that gives speed, mostly because Occultist does like to go first in the round, so speed's very helpful. But otherwise you can get dodge, speed, defensive quirks, slugger, you know, just melee damage if you really wanted to. Hippocratic's very good on him too. So there are a lot of interesting options out there that Occultist can run. It's probably a shorter list of quirks that don't work on him, just because he's so flexible that you will be able to find ones that work for him and then build around them. But I would primarily say that the best ones for him are probably range accuracy or like flat crit like Deadly, as well as speed, dodge, and like Hippocratic, and maybe like hard skin. Those are pretty good too. So those are my recommendations in terms of quirks, and then I guess accuracy too. So natural swing's also pretty good. Teams are pretty hard to suggest for Occultist just because he's so flexible. He can just go into pretty much any team and find something to do. Like you can say to yourself, yeah, I want to run these 3 characters, and then Occultist, you know, I just need someone else to fill, so just put him, you know, in rank 4 and he can do stuff. Put him in rank 2, he can do stuff. Put him in rank 3 or 1, he does stuff. So really, you're kind of limited just by your creativity with this character. It's like, do you need him to chip in on damage? He can do that. Do you need a secondary healer? He can do that. Do you have someone else's secondary heal and then he can be the primary healer? He can do that. Do you need someone to set up mark and debuffs? He has that. Do you need, you know, movement for whatever reason? He does that. He just has so many things that he's capable of that you will be surprised what teams you can just drop him into and he'll succeed. So he's not the most flashy character. He's not going to be like Hellion where she just eviscerates the entire enemy team in like 3 turns, or I don't know, Man-at-Arms who gets some really clutch guards and, you know, team control and stuff. He doesn't do that kind of stuff. He's got, you know, pretty good stun. He has some crits here and there. He's got his debuffs, but he's really just such a good all-round unit. He's kind of like a, if you want to go like a basketball analogy, he's a really good 6-man. Just someone that comes off the bench, basically, you know, gives you a few points and some rebounds, and you're like, wow, I'm really thankful to have this person here. He's kind of like that. I guess what I can do is give you a couple of examples though. Some of the teams that are pretty good for him to be in are things like Plague Doctor in the back, and then you have Flagellant up front, then maybe like Houndmaster, Occultist. That seems pretty solid. A lot of things go into the Flagellant Plague Doctor shell pretty well. And then this way, Occultist has a lot of versatility in what he can do. He can serve as like a spot healer. When you don't want to heal someone else, he can do some debuffs and stuff and chip in on damage. He has reach. He can contribute to the backline cleave. So he's got a lot of good stuff going on there. Or you could run him in something like the Jester Mark team. So the normal default Mark team is called Mark for Death, and it has like Arbalest, Occultist, and Bounty Hunter. I forget who else is on that team, but that team it's all right, but the issue with it is that it's pretty slow primarily, so the Jester Mark variant is much better. So you have someone like Arbalest or Musketeer in the back, and then you have Jester, Bounty Hunter, and then Occultist up front. That team is pretty strong just because having a Mark team get fixed in terms of its speed issues by Jester and also getting more crit is really good. Occultist doesn't have as much pressure to heal because he's able to have the rest of the team, you know, kill quickly because of the stat bumps from Jester, and then also stunning stuff before they get to act is really nice. Or if you just want to put him in a rank 4 support situation, he can literally go with anyone else that you want to put on the team. So you can just draw him in rank 4, he can throw out his debuffs, he can throw out his heal, he can pull enemies, you know, pretty good if you have someone like Leper up front, so you can just pull enemies into Leper, that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of interesting ways to use this character, and I think actually the last one I should cover is a very strong shell of 3 characters. So you have Plague Doctor, Jester, and then Occultist in rank 2, and then you can put a really strong frontliner in rank 1. So usually Leper is the best choice because you get a lot of versatility in terms of healing options. You don't have to just use Occultist to heal, you have Solemnity, you have a lot of damage mitigation through stuns on the team, you have the Intimidate and Weakening Curse spam combo, which is very strong, and then you have Jester to kind of supercharge everyone, and then you're getting more crits and more damage and stuff like that. So you have a lot of options for Occultists. It's just there's so many to cover that, you know, one video with a section of like, you know, 5-10 minutes or whatever just isn't going to do it. One final tip I will leave you with is that if you want to run Occultist in rank 2 as a stun bot that I usually advocate for, there's a time you have to understand when to turn off the stunning and start using the damage moves like Sacrificial Stab. So that kind of takes some experience. Like if you're killing very slowly, like if your team doesn't have a lot of damage options, your fights are going to turns 5 and 6, then Occultist should start stabbing at like turn 3. I guess that's my final tip. That's something that took me a little bit to learn myself, so maybe it'll help you. But anyway, that's gonna do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. The next character coming up in the guide series is Houndmaster, followed by Abomination. So we're trying to get through these. Just taking me a bit, so I appreciate everyone's patience and the support. And if you enjoyed the video, as always, give it a thumbs up, leave your thoughts in the comments, check out the box, join Discord, join Patreon, all that fantastic, awesome stuff. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.